Biden's first State of the Union address comes at a time of extraordinary global unease and dissatisfaction at home. He began with a focus on Ukraine, warning Russia it would pay a price for its unprovoked and premeditated invasion. The president led lawmakers in a bipartisan standing ovation in support of Ukraine and its ambassador in the First Lady's box. Then Mr. Biden pivoted to domestic issues, saying the fight against COVID-19 continues, but business lockdowns and school closures are over. He pledged to fight the highest inflation in 40 years by pushing for a return to American manufacturing and the creation of more jobs, and ended with a call for renewed commitment to democracy.
Now is the hour, our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. It is in this moment that our character of this generation is formed. Our purpose is found. Our future is forged. Well, I know this nation. We'll meet the test.
CNN's European Affairs commentator Dominic Thomas and senior political analyst Ron Brownstein join us now for more analysis on the speech. Welcome to you both. Great to have you with us.
Thank
So,
you,
Ron, let's start with you. As expected, of course, the war raging in Ukraine was a major focus of President Biden's State of the Union address. He slammed what he called Putin's premeditated and unprovoked war, but he also addressed America's record inflation, surging gas prices, and the COVID pandemic. Did he successfully strike a balance between global concerns for Ukraine and the grave concerns that Americans have right now about the economy?
Yeah, by and large, I think he did. He probably spoke a little less about Ukraine, even though he placed it at the front end of the speech than I think some people expected, and pivoted back to his domestic agenda. But I guess I was struck, Rosemary, by one consistent thread through the speech, which is that Biden tried to blend together ideas that are often thought of as incompatible in American politics. I mean, he was both conciliatory and confrontational toward Republicans at various points. He took credit for the gains the economy has made to this point, but also was very clear in trying to signal concern for those who are most affected by inflation and continuing economic turmoil. As you said, he kind of said this is the moment to come out from the pandemic, but also underscored the need to continue to plan for the next upsurge. I mean, it was a very particular and personal course. It wasn't the kind of course correction that we saw with Bill Clinton's 1996 State of the Union. The era of big government is over, but neither was it kind of just straight ahead on the same themes and strategies that have proved so difficult for him in the first year. It suggests to me that he is a president who still believes in his own political compass, even as events have caused many in both parties to question.
And Dominic, this of course was a State of the Union address not only for the American public, but also for a global audience, particularly for NATO allies, the EU, and of course the people of Ukraine. Was President Biden tough enough on Putin? Did he need to go further perhaps and declare him a war criminal? And did he need to offer more in terms of arming Ukraine and NATO allies?
All great questions, Rosemary. I think, first of all, referring to him as a dictator was an important thing to say. And I think juxtaposing democracy and autocracy, and also unambiguously reaffirming his commitment to the multilateral order, to organizations like NATO and the European Union, would have been music to everybody's ears. I think that the speech, though, would have been received differently in different parts. So I think that if you're in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland, hearing the American president talk about the fact that any incursions west by the Russian army, in other words, into EU or NATO territory, would be a red line, would have been incredibly reassuring. And I think that when you look at President Zelensky and a day for Ukraine, he spoke by video conference to the European Union, received a standing ovation, and it was very moving to see his ambassador to the United States receive a standing ovation in Congress. But I do think that where President Biden would not have reassured him completely is that the absolute priority, and to this extent there are competing objectives for the Ukrainian president, is to make sure that his country is not subjected to further incursions or broken up. Whereas there's tremendous concern in the United States and amongst Western allies for the potential for escalation and, of course, for recourse to nuclear weapons. That is something that President Putin has exploited thus far. But I do think what was clear to conclude from President Biden's speech was the fact that it was clear, a message to President Putin, that he has grossly underestimated the will of the West to come together and to support Ukraine in whatever shape or form it can while avoiding escalation.
And Ron, President Biden, of course, it has to be said, is struggling right now with an approval rating at 41%. That is according to the latest CNN poll of polls. How convincing was he that he understands the plight of most Americans and is equipped to turn their economic woes around with inflation at record highs, gas up 40%? And did he successfully set the course for the midterm election in November, do you think?
He dropped breadcrumbs about where he's going on the midterm election. As you point out, he is really at a low ebb. 40% or so in job approval is a number that strikes fear in the hearts of Democratic candidates, because as in the last 20 years or so, we've gotten to a point where something like 85 or 90% of voters who disapprove of a president vote against his party's candidates in the midterm election. So Democrats clearly need some recovery from the president to have a fighting chance in November. I thought he faced a little bit of a conundrum. I mean, the two biggest problems he has in public opinion polling, one is that what you mentioned, inflation. People are really unnerved by the rising prices. The other is the sense that he's not a strong leader. And to some extent, the way he solved the first problem in the speech tonight may have exacerbated the second problem. And by that I mean his solution to inflation was largely elements of the Build Back Better agenda, provisions that would reduce prices for prescription drugs like insulin and utility costs and childcare costs and healthcare premiums, all of which are quite popular with voters. But the fact that he highlighted them really only draws attention to the fact that he's not been able to pass them. And there really isn't any indication yet whether Joe Manchin is going to allow them to pass any of them. So he has some armor or tools to kind of wield against the concerns about inflation. What isn't clear is whether he has a pathway to actually bring them into law.
And Dominic, President Biden has shown the world that he can unite NATO allies and get them all on board to apply these severe economic sanctions on Putin and Russia's oligarchs in order to apply unprecedented pressure on Russia in the hope to stop this war. But uniting America appears to be a greater challenge for him, doesn't it? Was there anything he said in his State of the Union address that signaled he could unite not only the country, but also his own disenchanted Democratic base?
I think Ron pointed to that. I mean, this was the bipolar aspect of what he said today. The State of the Union is, of course, to address the state of the United States today. Having said that, the broader global context is extraordinarily important. And there is so much uncertainty with how this is going to unfold in Europe, in Ukraine. There is so much uncertainty about the kind of commitment that might be required down the road and how this conflict could also play out and impact the U.S. economy. I think that at the early part of the speech, we saw this sort of tremendous unity, and there was clearly a message to sort of demonstrate internationally that the kind of unity that he is attempting to build at home needs to mirror rather the kind of international diplomatic success that he is enjoying at this particular moment. But I think that when it comes to that sort of past those sort of first 10 minutes of his speech, you saw him dealing with a whole range of problems and uncertainties, and you could see the shadow of that midterm election hanging over him 8 months down the road. And in a way, there was a disconnect between those two particular moments in the speech, where currently that international sort of unity and solidarity is there. But clearly, as Ron has pointed out, within the domestic environment, there is a lot of tension there.
Yeah, certainly. He's had so many challenges, hasn't he, since he's been in office. Ron Brownstein, Dominic Thomas, thank you to you both. We will see you back here live next hour for more analysis.